Morning all. Technical problems. Sorry, I'm very overexposed here. I came on really like 15 minutes ago and the camera was massively playing up. So I've had to uninstall and reinstall things and I'm having to now use a camera and setup that's not designed for this. So I'd actually sorted the lighting out and then all of a sudden it's gone again. Never mind. It'll take me a lot longer to fix the problem. But I thought we'd kick off today with, because you know the unexpected story of the summer was of course these basically terror attacks in many cases, but we could say more generally riots, because not everyone who took part in them was actually a terrorist, even though those who were sort of organising it inevitably were. And what we're seeing is, of course, we're seeing people go through the legal system. We've seen a lot of people very quickly arrested, charged, convicted because they've admitted their guilt. We're seeing some people saying they're not guilty, so they're going to go through the trial system. And, over the next few months, we're going to see more and more people being convicted of that. And indeed, over the next few years. But ultimately, what people are looking at is what about those who instigated it all? What about those who, we could say spent years, but even as the violence was kicking off, what about those who were organising it? What about those who were giving them covering fire in the media? And top of the list of these sorts of people, you're talking about Reform UK MPs, Nigel Farage being absolutely top of the list there. And you're talking on the other side, and if I'm echo, sorry, there's absolutely nothing I can do if you've got an echo. I really don't know why that would be. But, there's on my end, there's nothing I could see about that. And it's, and on the other side, in terms of the groups that are actually organising it, the most prominent of those being Tommy Robinson. And I discussed on my own channel last week how Tommy Robinson, it may be like an Al Capone situation. So we all know what Al Capone was really guilty of, but what he went down for was tax dodging. Is it going to be the same thing with Tommy Robinson? Because at the moment, we do not know, by the way, whether there will be a serious criminal investigation into Tommy Robinson's involvement in these riots, because he was well out of the country, remember, but he was still directing things. And of course, he'd whipped up a load of hatred with his defamatory lies, basically, video in London just a few days before. And, is there going to be a real criminal investigation? Are we going to see him arrested? Are we going to see him charged? Are we going to see him convicted for any of these offences? We don't know. Because the fact that he hasn't been arrested yet doesn't mean, I don't think he's even in the country. But even if when he's back in the country, we don't know yet, because the case against those deeper involved will be more complex, and the police will need to make sure they've got, their evidence sorted out before they can pass it on to the CPS and all the rest of it. But he is being investigated at the moment. So I talked last week about the fact it was being revealed that several of he's got loads of companies, right? A lot of them quite dodgy. And there were several companies that were sort of going under. They were declaring insolvency. And Dan Needle, as famous tax lawyer and commentator, was pointing at the fact that there was something very dodgy about this. First of all, these companies hadn't posted any accounts. And you've got to post annual accounts, right? By law. Criminal offence not to. And they hadn't been doing that. And also, when they were declaring insolvency, he was noting that these companies, one in particular, had all of its debts effectively it was a tax debt, which is unusual. When a company actually becomes insolvent, it'll owe loads of creditors, and HMRC will be one of them. Inevitably, you end up owing a load of tax, because the way tax works, for those who don't know, because in the UK, if you are a salaried worker, your company deals with your tax for you. But when I'm sort of doing my tax, so for example, the tax year that's just ended, 2023 to 2024, it ended in April. I don't have to post my accounts until at the end of this year. So, you know, you've got a lot, and then you've still got time after that in order to pay it, although they do sort of try and get you to pay it in advance these days. But yeah, I don't have to post my accounts till the end of the year. And and so a company obviously that goes insolvent is bound to owe a load of tax, but it also owes a load of other people, and yet these companies didn't owe a load of other people, just owed HMRC. So Needle was saying that was dodgy and would, you know, they go after him. Well, they are going after him. HMRC are going after him for the unpaid taxes. But here's where it gets interesting, because, well, there's a couple of ways in which it gets interesting. The first way, I'll do the least interesting way first. So the first is, so Tommy Robinson, some of you may know, declared bankruptcy a couple of years ago, a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. He's declared bankruptcy, right? And he's been convicted of fraud in the past as well. So he's not allowed to act as a director of companies in this country. So although we say Tommy Robinson's companies, and this money is absolutely be going into his pocket, it's not Tommy Robinson who is listed on Companies House as being the directors of these companies. It's other people, including his ex-wife, but also others as well. In you know, some accountants and others, tax lawyers and so on, have been acting as directors. So the idea is here that HMRC could go after these directors as well, these other associates, which they'll have to. And if they end up, because they've been running dodgy companies, if they end up being barred from acting as directors as well, what Tommy Robinson will have done is he will have caused these people to not be allowed to direct even their own legitimate businesses. So you end up with a situation, Tommy Robinson, in order to like gather this cash, is hiving donations from like people he's conning into these companies. Then he's declaring them insolvent while he siphons off the money into his own pocket and then declares the companies insolvent. But it's other people who are named as directing these companies. If HMRC get those barred from doing so, then the next wave of like these companies, shell companies really, that he's wanting to set up, he'll not find anyone to manage them for him, because it'd be like, no, because you're shining a spotlight on us. But do you know what the really interesting thing is? Gary Arnold said, I used to work for HMRC, don't ask me about it now. Well, I mean, I'm sort of hoping as well. I mean, HMRC obviously is independent of the Treasury to an extent, but at the same time, it follows government guidance. And it's the government who decides, for example, how many tax officers it has. If you, and Rachel Reeves has said she's basically going to significantly increase the number of tax inspectors working for HMRC. You give them more tax inspectors, they will chase down more tax evasion. So, and Rachel Reeves obviously wants to raise as much money as possible for spending promises. And part of it, she's been quite open about the fact, is chasing down tax evasion and closing loopholes for tax avoidance. But this is tax, well, this sounds like tax evasion. But do you know what the best part of this is? The best part of it, you say technically you're still bound by the Official Secrets Act. You're bound for life. When you are subject to the Official Secrets Act, we all understand it's for life. Doesn't matter where you move on to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be doing anything to protect official secrets. But the best part of it, you'll absolutely piss yourselves laughing if you've not come across this before. So, because there's a report in the Times about the fact that HMRC are going after him, and there was a bit of a slip that means that what Tommy Robinson seems to be trying to do to get out of this, do you know what he's going to try and do to try and get out of it? Because he definitely owes the tax. The tax is owed, and it's hundreds of thousands. And if HMRC determine that these companies were deliberately set up to evade, not avoid, evade tax, then the penalties will be severe. Someone mentioned earlier about Nadim Zahawi. He tried to say, oh, he just made an innocent slip. No, that's not the case. HMRC said that he was can't remember what the term was used now. It was careless. And Nadim Zahawi used that. Oh, yeah, I didn't mean it. No. Careless doesn't mean you didn't mean it. Careless just means that it wasn't the worst level of deliberately trying to get out of paying tax. But Tommy, if these companies, if HMRC can take the view and they can persuade the courts that absolutely, I don't think they even have to persuade the courts, I suppose, but if they take the view that these companies were deliberately set up to evade tax, then the penalties applying would mean he won't owe hundreds of thousands of pounds, he could owe millions. That's what the Times article is saying, and they're reporting on what Dan Needle has said. I do follow Dan Needle on Twitter myself, but I haven't seen that directly. But the best part of that, I know I'm building up to it, but it's so hilarious if he tries it. So, Tommy Robinson wants to get out of this tax bill, right? So what does he do? He's liable for it. He can't stop HMRC. So what does he do? He's going to try and claim, potentially, this is what the suggestion is, he's going to try and claim that he's not resident in the UK. Now, first of all, can he get away with it? Actually, apparently, he might be able to get away with it because he spends a lot of time in Spain. So Tommy Robinson, the English nationalist, right? I don't know how many of his supporters know this, doesn't actually spend very much time in the UK. Like, he's not in the UK at the moment. He was doing, as soon as he set off that, committed that contempt of court in showing that video again about that Syrian lad, he was off to Cyprus, then Greece, then Spain. So they reckon actually he might be able to make a case, because to declare yourself as non-resident in the UK, you have to spend a maximum of 45 days here, apparently. So the suggestion is that Tommy Robinson actually doesn't spend more than 45 days a year in the UK. So this English nationalist spends almost no time in this country he claims to care about, right? And it's not like he can claim he's going around the world, doing something for England. He's sunning himself in beaches. But here's the best part. So there's actually two good parts to it. The best part is, if he claims this, I've tried to see if I can see a comment. If he claims that he's not resident in the UK for tax purposes, that he's actually resident somewhere else, Spain, do you know what that means? It means Tommy Robinson is going to try to defend himself, potentially in court, against this tax bill by claiming that he's an immigrant. Tommy the immigrant Robinson. Yeah, someone's saying with his Irish passport. Yeah, well, that's how he can spend time in. If he didn't have an Irish passport, he couldn't do it. Because now, if you've got a British passport, you're only allowed to go to the EU for 90 days out of every 180. So we're limited. Which is not, the Express goes, oh, this is just the EU being mean. No, it's the same limitations for everyone else. An American passport holder, same thing. It's just what you do if you've not got an EU passport. You are only allowed to spend 90 days out of every 180. Not Tommy Robinson. Got an Irish passport. Can stay as long as he likes. Can come and go as he pleases. He doesn't have to queue up as well. He can just go straight through where he likes. Cyprus, Greece, Spain, anywhere he likes for as long as he likes. No questions asked. Not a problem. But Michael is asking there, is he registered for tax purposes in Spain? No. Because this is the other thing, you see. So Dan Needle has also, according to this article, pointed out, it may not actually work out for him if he tries to claim to be a resident of Spain, because then the Spanish government or the Spanish tax authorities will go, oh, well, we'll tax you instead then. And Spain will give him, according to Needle, they will probably give him a bigger tax bill than we do. They are much keener on making sure you pay your tax in Spain than in the UK. Wealthy people don't get on quite so well there in terms of dodging it. But so that, and then the other thing to point out about the Irish passport, which is totally separate, and I don't think anything will come of it, but it's funny anyway. So people may know that in Ireland, politicians are looking at this because they've looked at, Tommy Robinson's behaviour now. They've looked at the fact he made a false declaration. You remember when he got arrested in Canada with a false declaration? And they are now wondering if he obtained his Irish passport under false pretenses. Now, I suspect. I mean, I'm not an expert, obviously, in any form of law, let alone Irish law. I suspect. Well, you say Tommy had an Irish grandmother, he had an Irish mother. So Tommy Robinson will legally have a right to an Irish passport. So I suspect nothing will come of it. But what the Irish Parliament was noting was that on this paperwork that he produced for the Canadian authorities, he'd said he was born in Ireland when he wasn't. He was born in England. He was born in Luton. So now they're wondering, did he, in applying for his passport, did he do it under false pretenses? Did he falsify the form? Because I've no doubt Ireland would love to take that passport off him. Now, I strongly suspect he's probably just lied on the Canadian paperwork for whatever reason. I have no idea. Because he is legally entitled to the Irish passport with his Irish mother. So yeah, but it would be funny, because you can imagine a situation. Let's say Ireland had some reason to take away his passport, then he wouldn't be able to just come and go as he pleases around the EU. He'd have to manage on his British passport. Also, if HMRC go after him and they go after his associates, the people who have been directing his companies for him, and they bar them from directing companies, even their own legitimate ones, it means that no one can actually direct Tommy Robinson's companies. The because he has got some legitimate, I say legitimate, legally legitimate. They're still horrible companies, what they do, but some of them aren't breaking the law, right? So it would mean he can't direct them because he'll be barred. He'll have been he'll be a double bankrupt, because he's going to, if he gets landed with this massive tax bill, he'll just declare bankruptcy again. So he'll be a double bankrupt. Someone convicted of fraud. So he should never be able to direct a company again. But if you also stop the people who have been directing his companies from doing so, and it'll also stop him being able to persuade anyone else to do it, because they'll get clobbered with the same thing. So if he can't actually get anyone to run these dodgy companies, then how, it's like you sort of have a way of cutting off his funding, don't you? And although what we really want to see is we want to see the serious criminal investigations into, what's going on. This is where, sometimes tax authorities can be quite useful, because people like that rely on dodgy financial dealings to fund their activities. Because ultimately, at this point, we're really just talking about the money that goes in his pocket so he can afford to go swanning all over Europe, sunning himself on the beach. But in actual fact, some of the money inevitably is being used to fund the infrastructure that allowed these riots to sort of flare up so quickly and so well organised. And that would be, organising those riots is illegal, of course. So if you find the network that was doing it, if you find the people who were managing that infrastructure, some of the money coming from all this will have been involved there as well. But there we go. Nick's there saying millions of Americans who've never been to Europe but who happen to have Irish Italian lineage can get EU passports. I mean, it only goes so far back. But Brits who were deeply integrated for 50 years are left high and dry. Well, but from a point of view of we chose to do it. No one kicked us out. They should kick Hungary out. But I don't think there's a process of doing that. But we weren't kicked out. From collectively we chose to do it. That's the problem. A majority of people voted for it in a referendum. And then, although no majority voted for the hard Brexit in 2017 or 2019, people didn't act pragmatically and vote to stop it when given the chance in 2 general elections. Admittedly, it would have meant people having to hold their nose and voting for something they didn't want to. But, Sean, I have a 3-leaf clover. Am I entitled to an Irish passport? No, you're a leaf short, mate. Sorry. Under Irish law, your Irish passport can be rescinded if you are a threat to the state or if you're a threat to the common good. Foreign minister can just sign an order and it's gone. See, I don't know about these things. Again, I strongly suspect there will be some, there will be some legal process. I don't think it can just be that the foreign minister, as you say, can just go, oh, I don't like this person. Obviously, I don't think they will be able to argue he's a threat to the Irish state, as long as he doesn't go and live there. Is he a threat to the common good? Sure, yeah, but I'm sure that's got a legal definition in Irish law as well. And I'm sure that if the Irish government, and bear in mind, this is just a few Irish politicians. I don't know that the Irish government themselves have said anything on it. If they have, I've not seen it. I don't know. But I would suspect that they'll have to make sure that it would, Tommy Robinson would inevitably take it to court. They'll have to make sure, because it's apart from anything else, it would be embarrassing if you lose the court case. So you'd have to make sure you get it. Paul Weston, Al Capone finally went to prison, not for murder, extortion, racketeering, but tax evasion. Well, exactly, this is what I say. It was about 100 years ago, about 90 years ago, something like that, wasn't it? And it could be the same thing because, so imagine the scenario, because at the moment I've just talked about the fact he'll be landed with this huge tax bill. That doesn't put him in prison. That doesn't put him in prison. But I did think to myself, Boris Becker, I'm not tying Boris Becker to Tommy Robinson, but Boris Becker had to declare bankruptcy because he ended up going a bit mad with the old spending. And then he tried to conceal some wealth from the court. So he ended up going to prison. I actually felt sorry for him because he had just been silly. But at the end of the day, you've lied to court, right? So he went to prison. So now I'm thinking of the scenario here. So let's say Tommy Robinson gets landed with this huge tax bill. And I don't know how long that'll take, but, let's say. And he can't, so he declares bankruptcy, right? But then he keeps trying to get the money rolling in again. A bit like Alex Jones over in America. He tries to keep the money rolling in and he's hiding it again in these dodgy companies. Well, if he gets caught out deceiving the court, because, once you declare bankrupt, it's not like, your debts are cancelled. You are supposed to contribute what you can. So if he's got money coming in, I don't know how he's able to afford to go off on these foreign holidays because he declared bankruptcy a few years ago. The bankruptcy lasts how long does the bankruptcy last? Is it 7 years or something? Or is it a variable term? But surely there must have been surely they must be saying, well, what income you have has to go to an extent. I don't actually understand how he's able to keep leaving the country like this when he is a bankrupt. But anyway, I don't actually understand. I don't know the law on bankruptcy. Anyway, a couple of super chats. Tim Ballum, £2 super chat. Thank you. Just banning from the UK. I did say, actually, when he left, wouldn't it be hilarious if Yvette Cooper just said, I'm revoking your citizenship and you're not allowed back in the country. And I said, it would be very wrong, by the way. She shouldn't do it. But it would be very funny. And Johnny Copperton, £2 super chat. Thank you. He says, my grandmother had an Irish setter. Any good? I don't think dogs get you a passport. But there we go. We need photos of Badger, Big Phil. I actually just interestingly sent off dog food for there's some badgers somewhere around being released back into the wild after being cared for, and I sent off some. They need some dog food to sort of help rehabilitate them, so I sent some of that off for that, just on the badger front there. But there we go. Colin saying, who were Remainers supposed to support in 2017, 2019? Labour were led by someone who wanted Brexit more than May Johnson Truss. Arguably, yes, but they were never. A Labour government would never have done it. And in actual fact, in 2019, Labour were explicitly promising a second referendum with with Remain as an option. That's what people had to do. If people, that's what people had to do. They didn't. At the end of the day, people use their vote as they will. But in 2019, in 2017, Labour never would have done it. It doesn't matter that we know that the leader was a Brexiteer. It doesn't matter. The fact that he couldn't openly say that while he was leader tells you that the party wouldn't have allowed it. Because otherwise, wouldn't he just come out and say it? Patrick there saying, if he's not resident for tax in the UK, shouldn't the Spanish tax authorities be looking at? Yeah, that's what Dan Needle said. At the point at which he successfully argues that he's because he can't just say I'm not a resident of the UK. He's going to have to sort of say where he's resident of. And as soon as he does that, the Spanish tax authorities, which by all, I don't know, but Dan Needle is an expert on tax matters. He is of the view that the Spanish tax authorities are going to be way keener to give him a big bill than the UK tax authorities, who've obviously been letting him get away with all sorts of shit for ages, as they have others. I mean, HMRC, the number of times I read a report about some business person or companies or something, and you read things like when I was reading last week about these companies that hadn't posted any accounts for years, and I thought, how were they not getting a knock on their door after the first year of not posting accounts? How was that a thing? How can you actually say, oh, this company didn't post its accounts for years? What? That shouldn't happen. As soon as you... I mean, they're registered on Companies House. HMRC have a record that this company exists. It's a legal entity. As soon as it's like... I mean, is there no... And again, it might be a staffing thing. Maybe this does go away as soon as they've got more staff. But how is it not a thing that you just go... You have a list of companies, and then you have a list of companies that posted accounts, and then you go to the ones that haven't. We're going to go and have a word with them. I mean, is it purely staffing, or is there something about the system that lets them get away with it for years? Because that sounds mad to me. That sounds absolutely mad. Patrick, they're saying Labour, Lib Dems and SNP are weeks away from forcing agreement to a second referendum. Decided to give Johnson the election he wanted instead. Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely mad. It was mad. MPs at the time, I know it wasn't talked about publicly, but I mean, I know from talking to MPs from the time, there was this view within Parliament that the deadlock couldn't continue. That was it. Something had to be done. And there were two ways to break the deadlock: a general election or a second referendum. So all they had to do was block that election, and the second referendum was inevitable, even with the Conservatives in charge. But given that, initially the SNP and the Lib Dems and then Labour afterwards decided, oh, general election, spiffing idea. Given that that was the case, the only way to have stopped it at that point was to stop the Conservatives having a majority, which basically meant you wanted a stop the Tories type scenario in 2019. There it is. I don't blame the voters. I always say it's, at the end of the day, Labour made themselves electorally toxic. And it makes more sense to blame a small number of people than a large number of people, right? But that is what it is. Steve's Retro saying, still never got over Vodafone taking HMRC to nice lunch and managing to get right loads off tax. It's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. And I do hope something fundamentally changes with it. Because there is an extent to which I understand that some things will slip under, because if HMRC have only got so many enforcement officers, they've only got so many tax inspectors, whatever, then they can only do so much work, right? And it is known that tax inspectors more than pay for themselves. So the more tax inspectors you hire, the more tax revenues you will raise. It's really that simple. If you double, I'm not saying if you double the number of tax inspectors, you double tax revenues. That's silly, because most people pay their taxes without needing to be threatened by the taxman. But you will increase your tax revenues by more than it costs to hire those tax inspectors. Much more, in fact. But there it is. A lot of companies don't post accounts for years. Can be pretty normal, but they'll get to a point where they'll have to post or dissolve. They shouldn't be allowed to not post them. There's no... I can't get away with not posting mine. Can you imagine? Like, or maybe I can. Who knows? But I'm not going to try. Like, it's an absolute madness. It's a nonsense. Like, you have to buy. I'm being told it's a criminal. It's not just the law. It's a criminal offence not to post accounts. It shouldn't be normal. What you're basically saying is it's normal to allow companies to break criminal law, not just break the law. No. And there's no reason for it. I've yet to see a valid reason for it. I can get, like, let's say a company is going through some real problems, right? Let's say your accountant's done a runner or something like that, or just died suddenly, and your accounts department's in a mess. Contact HMRC and explain that you're going through this thing. You need a bit of time. I get that. I can get something like that. But just to not post accounts without a word to HMRC about the reason, and to be able to do it for years, because even if, like, your the head of your accounts department just died or ran off or something like that, and no one else knows what was going on, it's going to take you. The company still has a duty to get someone in who will go through it and sort it out. It may, yes, you can understand there may need to be a delay. You know, you say to HMRC, sorry, this thing's happened. Can we have a couple of months? But, you know, to do it for years, like, no, it's mad. But there we go. Definitely ignore tax inspectors. They will make the rich pay. Well, I mean, we do. And I mean, Rachel Reeves said before the election, I mean, that will crack down on tax evasion. But yeah, we do need this thing where we don't just, like you said about, someone said about the Vodafone thing, just taking them out for lunch and going, oh, we'll do you this special deal. No special deals. Especially for companies like that. There's no need for special deals for companies like that. I can sometimes understand special deals where in return they're going to like locate a headquarters somewhere and employ people. All right, that's like a tax break, really. Okay. Really, the government should be leading that, though, not HMRC. I don't think something like that should be left to HMRC because they haven't a certain level of independence from the government, which means they're not... Obviously, their budget is determined by the government and there's a certain amount of oversight, but they're not directly ordered to do things by the government, so there's that level of operational independence. But that also means, where's the democratic accountability for them? So they shouldn't be making decisions like that. If there's to be a tax break, it should be the Treasury that agrees it, who are directly overseen by elected politicians. Shouldn't be HMRC. But anyway. There will be a law of diminishing returns, no pun intended, with more tax inspectors. Yeah, sure. I'm not saying like if you had 1 million tax inspectors, but at the moment there's so much tax evasion going on. Actually, those diminishing returns will not happen. You'd have to massively increase the number of tax inspectors. Huge amounts of tax that is believed. What is it? Something like 200 or more billion pounds a year that is believed to be just disappearing. Tax evasion. That's not tax avoidance. That's tax evasion, I believe. Just people falsely reporting and not paying their proper taxes. And then you have got tax avoidance. You know, people who are just managing their affairs offshore. I've said there's various ways I would tackle this. There are things, and you know, and Reeves said that she would be tackling tax avoidance schemes as well. And I hope they go after some, you know, the really big stuff. Like, for example, I don't think certain companies should be allowed to be based offshore, including media companies. So if we were talking about media reform, one of the first things I would do, which, because you'd want to start off with things that can't be attacked as an attack on free press. One of them would be not to allow them to have, not to take part in tax avoidance schemes. So they're not allowed. So like the Daily Mail, for example, is registered offshore for tax, but no. If you're going to run a media organisation in this country, then you will be based in this country for tax purposes as well. No offshore shenanigans. I would do that. Laura Berry saying, unfortunately, the fines for non-compliance with tax are less than the tax bill. Well, you pay the tax bill as well. And the fines can actually be more. If you're, it all depends on, do you think it was inadvertent? I've had to pay a fine before for just being late with a tax return. The first, they were, you know, the first time I did it, they sort of let me off. And the second time, obviously, they weren't going to let me off because I was obviously looking like I was taking the piss. And I wasn't. I was just not used to doing it. And this was from way back when. This was when, like, from 2016 or something, when I just first started monetizing YouTube on a different channel. I was still working full time. I just wasn't used to tax returns. So when you have to fill this form in once a year that you haven't been used to forever, you do actually just genuinely forget. But that was just a small fine because it was just considered I was just an idiot. Nadim Zahawi was a bigger fine, proportionally as well, than I had to pay, because it was considered, in his case, it was careless. which, you know, I think is also fair enough. Like, what I was getting wasn't enough to pay an accountant. So, whereas he was getting enough money that he had an accountant, and the accountant should have been saying it's time to, you know, he shouldn't have been making those errors because his accountant should have done it properly. So it's a bit like saying he didn't give his accountant all the right information or something like that, which is a bit harder to get away with. But then something like this with the Tommy Robinson case could well be the most serious level, which can involve quite significant penalties on it. Katrina, they're saying tax penalties can be up to 300% of the tax bill. I mean, this is what Daniel's saying. He reckons he could be liable for a tax bill of about 600 odd thousand pounds. But if they decide that it was all these companies were set up deliberately to get out of paying tax, it could amount to millions, is the belief. So that's what's in this sort of article. I'm trying to find the figure now. But they reckon it could be millions that he's owed. It says here, Needle says the best case scenario, I think he means best case scenario for Robinson. He owes £692,000 in income tax, which coupled with interest brings his likely bill to £800,000. But if the taxman deems that his errors were deliberate and that he sought to conceal them, it could add a penalty, bringing the total owed into millions, force him into bankruptcy again. But there we go. Right, we've gone over again. Keep going. I didn't actually think we'd spend this long talking about it, but it is one of those weird things, isn't it? You know, we're all waiting for the police and the CPS to start. I mean, yes, we need the people who took part in the violence obviously need to go through the legal process, but it's the people who were driving it. It's the people who were driving it who, because they'll just find other stooges next time. They will just find more stooges next time. So we need to cut out those who are actually behind it all. But while we're waiting, it is quite interesting to note that sometimes just tax inspectors can be a good way of dealing with these people if you let them loose. But there we go. We'll leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel, of course. And until next time, I'll see you later.